There's a method that costs $1, uses 2 ingredients available at any grocery store, and preserves leather boots, belts, saddles, and field gear for decades of hard outdoor use in conditions that wear out every synthetic leather conditioner on the market within a single wet season. A method documented in Roman craftsmen supply records, in medieval cobbler guild manuals, in American frontier saddler notebooks, and in expedition records as the standard treatment that kept working men outfitted and functional across journeys lasting years through rain, river crossings, mud, and the kind of sustained outdoor conditions that turn untreated leather to cracked, stiff uselessness in a matter of months. The method combines salt and rendered animal fat, specifically tallow, the rendered fat of beef or mutton that any butcher sold by the pound until the synthetic conditioning industry made it unfashionable to mention. 2 ingredients, no laboratory, no proprietary chemistry, a process that any person can complete in their kitchen in 20 minutes and apply to every piece of leather they own in an afternoon. The result penetrates leather. Fiber at the cellular level displaces the moisture that causes cracking and stiffness and deposits a protective matrix of salt and fat molecules that preserves the leather's structural integrity for years without any reapplication cycle, which is precisely the reason you have never seen this method marketed at any outdoor or footwear retailer in the last 60 years. The global leather care products market generates over $50 billion annually. Let me take you back to where this all begins. The year is approximately 50 BC, and a Roman craftsman is working in a supply depot somewhere in northern Europe, treating the leather components of equipment that will need to survive another season in wet, cold, muddy conditions. The leather sandals that Roman travelers and workers wore across every terrain the empire encountered required systematic treatment to survive river crossings, rain, and mud that characterized long journeys in northern Europe. Roman supply records and the agricultural writings of Columella and Pliny, the Elder, document the use of animal fat preparations, specifically rendered tallow and sweat, as standard leather preservation treatments. Salt was added to the fat preparation as a preservative that prevented the fat from going rancid in storage conditions and provided additional protective chemistry to the leather surface. The combination was not accidental. Roman craftsmen were systematic people who documented what worked and passed that knowledge forward across generations of practical experience. The medieval period developed the salt-tallow method into a formal craft tradition documented in the records of cobbler and saddler guilds across Europe. In England, the Worshipful Company of Cordwainers, the London Guild of Shoemakers established by royal charter in 1272, maintained formal craft standards that included leather preparation and preservation methods passed down through guild apprenticeships across generations. Guild records from the 14th and 15th centuries reference tallow-based leather treatments as standard practice that distinguished properly maintained leather goods from inferior work. Here's exactly why it works, and this is the part that explains what premium leather conditioner labels deliberately leave out of their product descriptions. Leather is animal hide that has been processed to stabilize its protein fiber structure through tanning, either vegetable tanning using plant-derived tannins or chrome tanning using chromium salts, the industrial method that dominates modern leather production. The preserved protein fiber structure of finished leather is flexible and durable when it retains adequate moisture and fat content in its fiber matrix, and brittle, prone to cracking, and vulnerable to damage when that moisture and fat content is depleted by use, weather exposure, and time. Tallow, rendered beef or mutton fat, is composed primarily of oleic acid, palmitic acid, and stearic acid, which are fatty acids with molecular structures similar enough to the natural fats originally present in animal hide that they penetrate leather fiber readily and integrate into the protein matrix in a way that synthetic conditioning compounds do not replicate at the molecular level. When tallow is worked into leather at a warm temperature, warm enough to liquefy the fat but not hot enough to damage the leather fiber, the fatty acid molecules migrate into the fiber structure and restore the flexibility and water resistance that new leather possesses and that use and weathering progressively reduce over time. Salt plays a dual preservation role in the combination. Here is where the story gets interesting. The global leather goods and leather care market generates over $50 billion annually across footwear, saddlery, and accessories segments. The leather care products subsector alone, conditioners, waterproofing treatments, polishes, and protectors, represents billions in annual retail revenue built on a product replacement cycle that the industry has spent 60 years building into consumer behavior. Every major leather care brand recommends reapplication of their products every 3 to 6 months for footwear in regular use. Every leather boot manufacturer's care guide specifies their branded conditioning product as the required maintenance material. Every outdoor retailer stocks a dedicated leather care section that assumes the customer will return every season for fresh product. Tallow is not patentable. Salt is not patentable. The chemistry of fatty acid penetration into leather fiber protein matrix has been documented since Roman craftsmen described it in practical writing from the 1st century and will remain public knowledge regardless of what any conditioning product manufacturer spends on research and development. A person who renders beef fat from a butcher's trim for $2, mixes it with a handful of salt from their kitchen, and applies the result to their boots in a warm kitchen has a leather preservation treatment that Roman craftsmen trusted, that medieval guild craftsmen standardized, that frontier saddlers applied to every piece of leather that had to survive. The American wilderness, and that modern material science has confirmed, produces superior long-term fiber preservation to synthetic alternatives. They do not need a branded product. The knowledge never fully disappeared. The United States outdoor and working community has maintained continuous practical knowledge of tallow-based leather treatment through generations of farmers, ranchers, and working people who never fully adopted the synthetic conditioning default the retail industry preferred. The specification for neat's foot oil, a rendered animal fat product closely related to tallow in its chemical composition and preservation mechanism, remains an approved leather treatment in professional leatherworking standards, because practical experience across generations of field use has confirmed that rendered animal fat treatments outperform synthetic alternatives under sustained conditions that actually test the leather. Traditional bootmakers, including several respected American manufacturers who produce genuine welt-constructed work and field boots, continue to recommend tallow-based treatments for their products, specifically because the leather they use, heavy vegetable tanned full-grain hide, responds to rendered fat treatments in ways that synthetic conditioners do not replicate. Online communities dedicated to quality. American work boots contain extensive documented comparisons of tallow and synthetic conditioning treatments by experienced users logging hundreds of outdoor miles annually, consistently reporting superior long-term flexibility and waterproofing performance from tallow treatments applied correctly compared to premium synthetic products at 10 to 20 times the cost. To prepare and apply the salt tallow treatment, obtain beef tallow from a butcher, or render it yourself from beef suet purchased at any grocery meat counter for under $2 per pound. A Roman craftsman in 50 BC applied rendered tallow and salt to leather sandals that would carry workers across river crossings, through mud, and over mountain passes in conditions that would reduce untreated leather to stiff, cracked failure within weeks. He was not improvising. He was applying a treatment that the Roman supply system had standardized across generations of practical experience because it worked consistently in every environment those craftsmen encountered. The leather survived. The work continued. The knowledge of what kept that leather functional passed forward through every cobbler, saddler, and leatherworker who came after without a gap in the record for over 2,000 years. A leather care product brand manager in 1965 looked at shelf space in the outdoor retail market and understood that rendered animal fat from a butcher and table salt from a kitchen did not represent a product opportunity. They represented competition, the existence of a $2 solution to a problem that a $50 product line was being built to solve on a recurring seasonal basis. The response was not to improve on the traditional method. It was to make it invisible through a combination of retail channel control, branded product placement, and the gradual replacement of practical craft knowledge with product dependency across a generation of consumers who grew up purchasing their solutions rather than making them from ingredients their grandparents kept in the kitchen.